Hi, and it's Aurora again. This is video 2 of the 4-part series for the Blanket Women Initiative. And I'm with the Fireweed Collective Society. And I'm just really wanting to start this movement as a social movement towards change on ending violence against women in our community. And what we can all do is being responsible partisans of a culture here that shows women that they matter and that their safety matters no matter who they are. Okay, so today I'm going to go into hegemony and oppression and the cultural dominance narrative that has shaped the world for the last, 150 years, but really beyond that. If we need to get into 5,000 years ago to now, we can, but I don't think that really serves a difference in terms of the intention of this video. So I'm going to keep it to the last 150 years, which is really the narrative of the all-American dream and the social conditioning mindset that has waved us all throughout the school years. It's waved us all throughout social messaging in many ways, whether that is from our family who maybe overcame really hard times with World War II, with the Great Depression. It's really important to kind of work hard and live your dream, and this is what that dream looks like. Yeah, it is important to work hard and live your dream, but we're also told what that dream should look like, what it means to be an ideal kind of situation amongst the rest of the wider social fabric of the nation, of North America, of the world, what it means to be in the North American dream versus other countries. We all get a story, right? We can agree on that. And so that story gets imprinted at quite a young age. You want to be a lawyer, you want to be a doctor, you want to be a nurse. Those are very important civil servant positions for certain. But we get a story of a certain particular value set and mindset. And how that story impacts you or how you see and station yourself amongst that story can be unique for everyone. The story that I want to talk about that is part of that wider story is that it also holds down a large amount of people that maybe they're not able to thrive in that story that we're sold and given. Maybe they're not wanting to, and that's okay. Maybe they have different role and purpose other than that story. Maybe they're gifted, but they're not shown that they're gifted because it doesn't work with that story. I'll use an example of ADHD and ADD. This could rub people the wrong way, but that's okay because, I learned it in university and it's true. But anyways, in ADD was developed in the 50s in the United States because the United States decided that they want to be a very competitive country, particularly with Russia because, they've always been like guys at war, like, I'm better, no, I'm better, that kind of dialogue. And so they decided that they wanted to be super competitive. So what did they need to do in order to succeed in that goal, in that motive, in that directive? They needed to shape the kids that were then being guided in school to be a certain militant way. And so that standard that arose from that desire that the states had to be a competitive force was that anyone who kind of altered from that militancy, so that structure, that way of being, anyone who kind of altered from that would then be classified and diagnosed. And that was ADD and ADHD. So whenever we have a standardized system and a standard, there's going to be outliers within that standard. Of course, right? So you have a standard. Okay, you need to be able to sit in your chair all day long. You need to be able to care about these literacy terms. You need to, really create militancy and structured and linear thinking in the left brain hemisphere. So thinking logically. You want to think logically, and that's how we create militancy. And so anyone who deviates from that, whether it's people who, they have a lot of energy in their body, they don't want to sit still, they're not hardwired to, which is natural that all people are born with different sets of attributes, well then they all of a sudden become outliers to that norm and that standard, and then they become labeled. And so we can see this in many ways, and I won't get into that right now because I'm keeping it fine-tuned and focused on oppression, hegemony, and control of the narrative, in particular to women, right? And so there's been different standardized norms to women throughout history, right? Women used to have to have a fake male name just to be an author in the world, just to get their penwomanship out there. They had to act like they were a man because they didn't even have a right to have their words out there. Well, I'm having my word out there today. I'm just kidding. So the standard of the woman then becomes into this confined box in reality. And so social narratives, social stories, and family stories of what that woman's kind of role is becomes just ingrained. It's just a story that gets passed on, and this is just what we do. And we have lots of those. This is just what we do. We do it because we do it. Well, being able to analyze and critically look at those stories is a very important attribute to have. It's very important to be self-aware. It's very important to be critical about the social messaging that we receive and have received ourselves. This is a tool that is required for the coming days of our future. This is what is emotional intelligence is what is sought by corporations, industries. Everything is changing towards what heart-centered leadership is. By places like Google, by places that are prominent that you would think are very linear, and they're not. And so the only reason I say that is because when falling behind on the ability to unlearn and then relearn what else is possible, the community and people can really get more and more entangled in an old story that just doesn't work with the rest of the world, because the rest of the world is changing rapidly. And in any globalized world like we have today, it's changing exponentially. So when like numbers in a math equation start to accelerate really fast, that's what's happening all over the world today in terms of intelligence, expectation, and those kinds of things. I'm someone who believes that the simple things are what really matters, that allows wellness and thriving. So it's simple to me. It's not about this big like story that we have to succeed. And in fact, that's the story I'm trying to debunk, is that we don't have to succeed in the standard of the all-American dream. That all-American dream, that's an old story now. And we need a new story that changes the dialogue of what allows a well society, what allows wellness within our community structure as a whole. Because we are only as well as the people that, as the least well person. As a community, we're not well because of everyone and then average that level of wellness. If you can even quantify wellness, I don't think you can, but we're only as well as the least well people in our community. And so we're not very well at all because there's a lot of people who are suffering. And so looking at this hegemonic history in the last 150 years has led to people striving for success and what that means to them, and leaving behind the rest, those who fall outside of that standardized approach. And so I want to share a psychological experiment that I learned about in psychology. There were monkeys in a cage, and these monkeys were getting social messaging. So they were getting a pleasure or pain response to what they were doing. So what happened was they stuck bananas at the top of a ladder, and then the first monkey went up and they were able to get the banana. They got the pleasure of going, okay, I'm going to get a banana. I get the pleasure of eating it, and that's the good reward. So the second monkey goes up, but they get the hose. So they got the hose. They got sprayed with a really harsh hose, like a hose that was cold, right? So the monkey went down. Was like, what do you mean? Like, it's a natural response to want to get that banana. And now I'm being having something painful come to me in that natural response. And went and tried again, got the hose again, was wary of going up and getting the banana. So it was like, okay, I want the banana, but I can't get it. And so they introduced another monkey. That monkey didn't know that it might get the hose, right? So it right away went up to get the banana. And it got the hose again by whoever was doing the experiment. And so all of a sudden, there's 3 monkeys, all not seeking to get the banana. And then they introduced a 4th monkey into the cage. And that 4th monkey started to go up the ladder. But the experimenter, the psychologist running it, didn't even have to spray that monkey, because the other monkeys just grabbed that monkey and beat it up. So the other monkey went, well, they're supposed to get a negative feedback. They're not supposed to get the banana. I learned I can't get the banana, so I'm going to punish this monkey for trying to get the banana, because that's what we do. That's the new rule. That's the new standard, right? And so it becomes where the social imprinting, the messaging that comes, is that the social atmosphere then controls each other based on that messaging, whether it's natural or not for a person to behave in a certain way. We then start to control one another because of the messaging we received. And so this is a really important example because of circumstances that we can then be suppressing each other. As soon as you start deviating from a norm of the way that we think it has to be here, we start to punish each other in different ways. And this is just psychological part of social indoctrination and imprinting. So I would love to hear your feedback around ways that you have seen this applied, or if you have experienced this, because I think it's a really important conversation to have. So when I think about what it means to be free and liberated, and I'm in the community free and liberated, I don't have shame, I don't need to hold myself back, my natural responses to the world, but I get a negative feedback for that because of other social messaging that they received and accepted as true. And I personally experienced this as an adolescent because I didn't have all of the social messaging. And that's a big part of why I'm an anthropologist now, is because I didn't necessarily get the same messaging as the rest of societies. And so I was always kind of outside looking in because I grew up not within the community infrastructure and social messaging norms. So that allows me to have a lens that comes in and out of the water of the fishbowl. So the fish is only able to see the water that it's surrounded by, but you can't see the water that you're in until you jump out. This is a really important analogy used in medical anthropology, because when we look at the reasons why cultures do different things in order to be well, in order to treat one another, we have an either emic or etic lens. So an emic lens is the one where the fish is within the water and it's immersed in the meaning of that culture that it's given. So all the messaging, all the things about the world and the realities that you think it's supposed to be like, that fish has an emic perspective because it's in the water of that culture. An etic perspective would be someone who jumps into that fishbowl having been outside of it and jumps into it and then, or looks in at the fish that's in it, because really if they jump in it, they become an emic perspective, which a lot of anthropologists do. If they've been in a tribe for like 20 years, they form an emic perspective because they've been there so long. But I regress. There's an etic perspective of logic that an outsider looks in and can see it. And that's the outside of the meaning of the culture. So I had an etic perspective because I grew up at the end of Stuart Lake. So I was always looking in until I was immersed in it for a while. And then I jumped out again because I moved away and now I'm back. And so everywhere has its own kind of water and pools of cultures and ways of doing things. And we're part of a larger one of North America in the Western culture. But there's been hundreds of cultures and ways of thinking and doing things. So for us to have cultural humility, it really means that we are able to see that that's okay that people do things differently. Ours one way is not the right way. And I really want that to land because it's hugely important for us to move forward into what else is possible in wellness and how we treat women and violence and rape and domestic abuse and addictions and mental wellness. It's really, really important to understand that to look at something critically, to look at something of where did I learn that? Is that even true? Is that even necessary anymore? Maybe it was true at one time. We needed to do that. We needed to have an industrial revolution, to have a lot of agriculture. We needed to have all of these things. We needed to, have 2 cars and a home and strive for that dream and a boat and, compete and be better than our neighbor because that means we're doing good and we need to feel like we're doing good and enough. And then I know that I'm enough and I've done the dream that I've been told to do. And so we can critically look at, does that count anymore? Or is it at a turning point where things are so inequitable? So like when you look at the top down pyramid of like privilege of the people who are, doing very well to the people who are really not doing well, is this an ideal structure to maintain? A country is only as well as how equal it is. So the most healthy countries in the world are the ones that have an equal distribution. So Sweden and Japan are the highest ones in the world because of that. I'm not saying, socialism. I'm not saying that at all. I don't know what that looks like and what ism that looks like, and that's not a debate that I get into. But these are the facts. This is Population Health 101. And so when we look at how our most vulnerable are doing, they did not function in that standardized structure. That doesn't mean that they're wrong. It doesn't mean that they're bad. Or it means that way of being is too challenging because of the multiple barriers that they face each and every day and historically have faced in historical trauma and intergenerational trauma and those things. And I can get into that when it comes time for a different series, I think. So for now, I want to talk about this hegemony and oppression. So historical oppression is a story. It's a story that we receive and we say it's true, and we continue to live that story, even though it harms people, even though it leaves a lot of people out of that standardized structure. And this conversation is talking about the smoke or the fire. Like the smoke is everything that we see outside of that. It's every political liberal debate about women needing to get their needs met, about people of color needing to get their needs met, about any people that are disabled needing to get their needs met, about the LGBTQ people needing to get their needs met. There's always going to be outliers within a standardized structure and story. So when we look at that in our own community, what standardized structure and messaging are we giving of who is allowed within that story and who's not? So I know I talked about that in the first video, but I really wanted to expand on that even more because the people who are valued within that structure of story that we've decided is good, which I'm not saying it's not a good story. I'm not saying, we want developed structures. We want civil servants. We want people who've strived and committed themselves and are able to be functional within that story because that's what allows us to have a developed society. Yes, for certain, but we need to examine all aspects of it. Okay, so those people who are then valued, that are able to contribute to that story, we lift them up. They're shiny, they're great. They are contributing to the story that we want in our society, right? To have in our world. So if we value them, then does that mean that we're not valuing those who can't contribute? And I know there's a lot of liberal people who who work and support and lift vulnerable members of society, or people who don't live in that story, people who don't contribute. But this kind of story creates frictions and divides and factions against one another, that really doesn't allow for a functional relationship, and not having functional relationship with one another creates a lot of issues that we see, and we see it in our community. And I'd love to hear stories and see people kind of start to share what that means to them. I don't want to give direct examples because I don't want this to be about this should be this way and this way is wrong. I just want to give facts in an anthropological perspective. And so when you look at how those factions create people to rub against each other and judge each other or based on their values, like everything we see and do and choose to do and what motivates and drives us is based on our values. So cultural humility is not judging what one another values, including the all-American dream. Like, strive for 3 houses and 2 boats and whatever you want, like whatever gives meaning to you. But also, you know, live in the bush and care about foraging plants and care about, you know, teaching your children about the knowledge and the ways of the world and ethnobotany, and like one is not better than the other. But when we're taught in terms of good and bad and right and wrong, and we're taught what it should be and it should only be this, that's when I think the issue arises. And there's so many ways of being within just our community. But our community also shows shiny examples of how it comes together in crisis, how it comes together when stuff just needs to happen. And that's how I know and have hope for this initiative, the Blanket Women Initiative. So now I want to turn it intentionally on the direction of women in our community and in factions. So, rape culture. What is it? What is it not? This is going to be a contentious topic. Do we have a rape culture here? I know people in social services, people in the field kind of that I'm in, and people who are feminists and people who are aware of what rape culture is, they would all agree and say, yes, we have a rape culture here. What is a rape culture? The only way that we're going to move forward to not having a rape culture is by admitting and accepting that we have a rape culture here. It is a fact. It's been here for quite some time, 50 plus years, beyond that probably, obviously. So, rape is a lot of times about control and dominance, just like oppression and hegemony is a lot about control and dominance. So rape and control and dominance go hand in hand. What a rape culture is that underneath an iceberg, so the iceberg is what you see, and underneath that is a whole bunch of stuff. Underneath the water, the iceberg is way bigger, right? So on top is the overt act of rape that does happen here a lot. The overt act of violence, immense violence. But what's underneath the water are all the subtle things, all the subtle nuances or stories or the way of relating that happen that contribute to the overt acts of rape or the rape culture. So, what is underneath the water that we can recognize? I'm going to list a graph here, I think, and that will help a lot, but I'm also going to talk about it. So, the reason it's hard to talk about for me is because I've been touched by this iceberg myself most of my life that I've been here in Fort St. James. And so saying it comes with a lot of story about people, a lot of story about men that have crossed all divides, of class and race and who they are, and like stories that would appall everyone. And I know that a lot of women hold stories like that too. And I hope that as some stories start to come out in a way that's not trying to persecute, although that may be necessary and certainly could be if that's the woman's process, but in a way that moves this conversation forward and starts to lead towards accepting the facts that this is a problem that we need to address as a whole community. And that's first by accepting it. But what lies underneath the iceberg is a whole whack of things. It's the subtle remarks in the locker room. It's the, oh man, oh, she's got daddy issues. She's, go for her. Like, she'll be an easy score. That is hand-in-hand rape culture right there. It's talking about women's bodies in a really dishonoring way. It's not actually shaping an honorable message about women and their contributions in more ways than just their objective, their form and what they offer sexually or other things. It's all those jokes. It's saying, oh, don't worry about it. I'm just harassing you. Don't get all bent out of shape. It's not allowing a woman to say, hey, I don't like being talked to that way, because then they're shamed for having those feelings. It is obviously the overt act of rape where it's like, oh, you don't want to hook up? Oh, poor me. Like, not knowing where to stop with the boundaries. It's really blurred boundary lines. And when those boundaries are expressed, it's like subtle punishment for that woman expressing her boundaries. It's ways of being where women are slut shamed because, oh, well, you shouldn't have gone to that party wearing that, right? Or even, police or doctors saying things like that, like, well, what were you doing there? Oh, well, you were really drunk or whatever. No, like this, a woman's problem is also a man's problem. Like, what would it be like if men were protective of women and they protected their best interests instead of took advantage of them when they're vulnerable, right? And so how many women are in vulnerable spaces where that's taken for granted, but then not only that, they're silenced. They're silenced when they want to share their story, or ridiculed or shamed so that they stay silent. This is all part of a wider web of a rape culture. So what I want to say is we need to address this iceberg, share your own personal journey about what you're ready to, about this iceberg, and start to have it trickle through and impact our wider narrative of we need to make a change. In this Blanket Women Initiative, this is a fact that women can't feel safe here for a lot of reasons and in a lot of cases. And they need to be supported and lifted and raised in their voices and protected while they do it, and safe while they do it. And the only way that's going to happen is not to keep having it only behind closed doors. Oh yeah, secretly tell me your story. We won't tell anyone. No, that is another silencing dysfunction of a hegemonic oppressive society. We need to be out there and saying it and safe to do it, because enough people in the community are saying, we'll protect you. Share your story and we will protect you. You are going to be safe because this story matters. Because you matter. The women matter and the women's safety matters. And men are an equal part of this equation to show that by being part of this Blanket Women Initiative. So I hope that this clicks. I hope that this creates a response. And I'm sure it will, because it's a fact. And it's kind of like letting the elephant out of the room. It's time to make a difference. I'm glad I moved back so that I can be part of that difference making with my own story and my own liberation, and hopefully can create a positive change for other women in a safe way, but also for men in what their purpose and role can be in this, and accountability and responsibility, and how you say, hey bro, man, that's not cool. Like, that is not cool. Like, let's stop doing that. not in a way that's harassing and bullying one another and shaming one another. That's not going to create a change. What is going to create a change is saying, where did we even learn that? Like, that's not who I am. I just learned that. Like, so when we say something is a behavior we don't want to repeat, we're not saying like you're a bad person. We're saying we learned this story and we're replicating this story. We're keeping it going and allowing it even though it's hurting people. And let's look at that. That's not who I want to be. I want to look at that story. That's not cool. Like, everyone should feel safe. Women should feel safe. In societies, I'll go into this in the next video, but in societies where women and men have purpose and role within the gender dynamics, men are like protectors so that women can be free and expressive in who they are, and definitely not be harming them. There's cultures where women have genital mutilation, right? Like, every culture is different, but our culture is what matters to me in this initiative. What is our culture? And what are we willing to say yes to? And what are we willing to say no to? And it's time to stand up and say yes to women's safety. All women. It's time to take responsibility as a whole community of what that means. So even women, looking at how you view other vulnerable women. How do you see women? Do you mock women when they're being harassed? Or if you can see someone who's had a lot of trauma and they're acting very expressive in their sexuality, are you compassionate to them, or do you blame them for putting themselves in those situations? When really what's underlying is a lot of trauma, a lot of learned behavior from dysfunction. And do you see that person wanting that person to be safe, or do you see them in a scornful way? And where did you learn that, right? It's starting to look at and examine those things. Because what matters at the end of the day is that people are safe, they're cared about, they're healthy. Especially in a time like this, women are more at risk. They're already so socially isolated when they're in a domestic violence situation, that now being even more in it, it's a scary thought. And with the children at home from school, it's a really scary thought of what is being intermeshed and in the mindsets, in the emotion, in the way of life that is acceptable. But when those children or those people experiencing violence and abuse and really hard things, they don't get outer messages that they're cared about and that they matter. They look outside of themselves and they see out that there's no one saying like, hey, you matter. Where is the safety in that? How do they feel like they can escape that situation? How can we start to be beacons of light that say, hey, like, you can escape this and you're going to be supported, and we're going to go, yeah, like, we are in your corner, you know? It just needs to happen, because the outcome from this is really scary. The suicide risk that's going up, the mental health issues that are going up, the addictions, the abuse, the trauma, the violence, everything that's going up because of the social isolation. We need to stand even stronger. We need to stand even stronger in this Blanket Women initiative, because blanketing women right now, especially, is going to lift the whole community, and it's just a fact. And I'll go into why that is in the next video. Okay, thank you.